Philip Ingram, as I say, joining us throughout the show. Lots to talk about. Let's touch briefly on the economy. Everything's absolutely fine. We've got growth, all good. Apparently doing better than the economists expected, because they always get it wrong in one way or the other. Everything's fine now. Is that how you feel?
Do I have to agree because we're in the studio lock-in? The last lock-in I had was only a couple of weeks ago.
I know, I heard about that lock-in.
And that was with Dame Kelly Holmes in the Tower of London.
Well played.
Through the Veterans Can organisation. So,
excellent.
Yes.
Excellent.
But that's nothing to do with
There's
the economy.
no alcohol in this lock-in, though. This is...
Yes, that's the trouble. We'll
this
get
is
the door
just
open.
a hostage situation. Philip, I mean, people aren't going to be feeling any better. This is pointed out by the Reform UK. They put out a press this morning pointing out, all this cheering from the Chancellor. It's people don't feel better off. Why? Because they're not better off.
They're not better off, and it doesn't meet what the Chancellor had predicted she needs as a minimum for the growth to pay for all of the policies that the Labour government are elected on. But she's going to take this as a positive and try and spin it that her policies are going the right way and everything else. What hasn't happened in these figures is the impact of her increase in costs in national insurance and businesses and everything else haven't come in. They will come into the next set of figures, and we'll see what the reality is then.
Yeah, exactly. And as you say, pointed out earlier as well, that the sort of growth they need to actually achieve any of their policies they want to do. And again, things like building new prisons, you need to have money in the coffers.
In defence.
And there aren't money in the coffers. That said, if you want to achieve growth, maybe it's a good idea, don't put a tax on jobs.
Exactly.
National insurance rise. I mean, it's really that simple. Let's talk about the prisons, though. We had the announcement, obviously, we've got 3 new prisons being built, but we already knew that. Some of them already started actually under the Tories. Not enough, not soon enough. Failure under previous Labour governments, abject failure under the Tory governments for the last 14 years. But prisons, we are told by Shabana Mahmood, the Justice Secretary, are at breaking point once again, and basically going to have early release again. And it is going to include domestic abuse. It is going to include some sex offenders. If you have been serving an original sentence of between 1 and 4 years, unless you're a terrorist or deemed by the police or others to be a high risk to the public or other serious offences, you can't be facing release. We're at 99% capacity. Basically, she said, if we don't make some space, basically no one could be arrested and then charged and then convicted and then sent to prison. Also, this 28-day limit for basically if you're recalled to prison because you breached the terms of your licence, as a large number of people do, and indeed a huge number of people behind bars. I think 15% of those who have breached their licence. I would suggest that's because they shouldn't have been on early release. Is this the answer, though, releasing more people? Because 17,000 of the 88,000 prison population of men are men on remand. They've not actually been convicted of a crime. Now, most people aren't put on remand unless there's concern. But we've also got 10,000 plus foreigners or foreign nationals. Again, some... Hopefully, I would ideally like all would be deported on the day they finish their sentence. You could argue they should serve their sentences abroad. But many of those would be people who've lived here for many, many years, have family here. They are foreign. Now, I know, oh dear, yeah, exactly. But if you committed a crime to get put behind jail, then tough. Should have thought of that, guys. But we're talking about a huge number of the people some people would argue don't need to be behind bars. And by the way, a lot of those are on remand. It's because it takes so long for cases to come to court. The whole system is in abject failure. But as a point I put to Vanessa Frake, the former prison governor, was earlier, the conundrum is we don't seem to arrest anyone, we don't seem to prosecute anyone, barely anyone gets sent to prison anymore. And yet our prisons are overcrowded. How do you square that circle?
But the whole system has been broken and been broken for a long time. And this is what disappointed me yesterday from the Justice Secretary was there was nothing new. There was nothing evolutionary or revolutionary in what she was saying. There was nothing that's trying to find different solutions to deal with the problem. And again, you look at the number of sex crimes that are coming in the country. Large percentages are being committed by the illegal migrants that are coming in, very large number, and they need to be put in prison, but as they're being deported out of the country as quickly as possible. That's not going to happen, and we're just generating a bigger and bigger and bigger problem. We need to have different thinking. We need to have different leadership. We need to have different management in our prisons. We need to have a different approach. Until that happens, it's only going to get worse.
Absolutely, and again, we know what's going on behind bars. The average prisoner is spending basically 23 hours a day behind bars. They're not being rehabilitated, they're not being educated, they're living on drugs. Again, utterly rational to spend your life off your face on skunk if you're stuck behind bars.
In somewhere where there's complete control over what goes in and what goes out.
Yeah.
Or there should be.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it is just absurd. And then people, and again, the people who go into jail, we know an awful lot of them are drug addicts, alcoholics, they've been in care, they've got mental health problems, and we know that when they come out, those problems are often exacerbated. The argument from the left always seems to be that prison doesn't work, so we should send fewer people to prison. I think prison doesn't work, so we should send people to better prisons that do more.
And have different types of prisons and different ways of doing things. Yeah, as I was saying in the break, with our farmers are saying they don't have enough people to bring the crops in. If you want people to do community service and advanced community service, you say, right, during the time that we're bringing crops in, we have the effectively...
Farmers don't want those people. They want people who turn up and do the job properly and work at a pace. One of the reasons why they don't employ a lot of Brits, by the way, they employ people from Eastern Europe.
If you have people who, if they don't produce to the productive levels the farmers need, they don't turn up or they cause problems, they go straight into prison.
Back into prison.
Yeah.
No, that's a fair point. Yeah, and again, we know every single aspect of service probation, everything is understood. The key thing is justice is very expensive.
It is.
Having decent police, having them out and about, having fast courts. I mean, it is absolutely terrifying and shocking that you can wait 3 or 4 years if you accuse someone of rape to go to court. Not only is that awful for the alleged victim, it's awful for the alleged perpetrator as well if they're an innocent man. I mean, it's just unacceptable. We've got to get to grips with this, and it's abject failures for years.
Yeah.
It was terrible under Tories, but there wasn't any money for a lot of the early years, and then we went into all the chaos. And we are still dealing with that backlog from lockdown as well, where so little happened and courts weren't sitting a lot of the time. But I don't think that. Tell you what I don't think is part of the solution is what's being proposed is this idea of just taking away the right to a jury trial for cases up to a year. Everyone should have a right to a jury trial. Everyone should have a right to a jury. It's absolutely vital. Look, we're looking at cases. Looking at cases like Lucy Connolly.
Yes,
okay?
but
she's coming up for appeal. We're going to talk to Lord Young about that. Her case, 31 months. If she had pleaded not guilty and she'd gone to trial and she'd gone to a jury, I don't think she'd have been found guilty. I certainly don't think she'd have gone to prison.
Interestingly, I grew up in Northern Ireland where we had the Diplock courts. The Diplock courts did not have juries. They had 3 judges that were sitting there, and they were dealing with some of the more serious incidents because of the pressure that could be put on juries. Through
but that's different.
But it's not, because they may have been terror organisations, but they're also organised criminal organisations.
Yeah, but still, most of the cases we're talking about are not organised crime or terror related.
Most of them aren't, but there are other ways of doing things where things could be done.
I'd love to hear from you. Give us a call. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call to have your say on this. Text on 87222. Get in touch on X at talkTV as well. Just to mention also, we've got Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin are not going to be in Turkey for these Ukraine peace talks. That Zelensky has turned up. I think a bit of a diplomatic coup on his part to basically show, see, Putin doesn't care. But it's interesting, Donald Trump has been speaking right now. He's in Qatar, speaking at American Air Base. He's been, trolling is the best word to describe it. He's been speaking about his election campaign. It's one of those things. He just talks and goes on and on. Yep. You can feel that we're no longer on the North queue, are we? He told the US troops, we won 3 elections. You didn't win 3 elections. You won 2 elections, absolutely fair and square. The middle election, you did lose in 2020. He said, some people want us to do a 4th. I'll have to think about that. And again, a lot of talk about him running again for a 3rd term, which is, of course, illegal under the American Constitution. I don't think that's going to happen. He said since he wouldn't do it. This is just trolling. I just think, again, totally inappropriate for him to ever talk politics at all. He's the US president. But he's not the Republican at that point. When he's talking to US troops in a foreign land, you've got to be studiously non-political. I think that's really bad form. Well,
but that's the trouble with having a head of state who is elected in a political term. No, it is because Macron is political whenever he goes out and does things as the head of state in France.
Not talking to troops abroad.
Yeah, he'll come. He makes political points the whole way through, trying to undermine opposition. And you find that with people in all of these different positions. Where you don't have that is with the German president, because they stay apolitical. But if you look at Ireland, the current Irish president is making more political points and everything else. You need a head of state who is completely apolitical. That's one of the beauties of having a constitutional monarchy.
It is one of the bonuses of it. I'm just still old-fashioned about elected, accountable people. But there we are. As I always said, the Queen, the late Queen, she'd have stood for election, she'd have won 95% of the vote.
Exactly.
No, and not in a Putin or North Korea sort of way. She actually would have won it for the way she stayed above and beyond politics at all times. Something I think that King Charles, well, certainly when he was Prince Charles, did not do. Very interfering, all those little spider letters. And again, it's fascinating how much the public just go, oh, not talking about that anymore. And that was long before the very worrying cancer diagnosis. But just as soon as he became king, everyone forgot about those things.
But as Prince he can do it, as King he can't. Well, it's the same as Prince William's involved in lots of green things and other stuff. But when he becomes king, he won't.
In terms of Ukraine and Israel and Gaza, Vladimir Putin not turning up in Ukraine again. I think he's overplayed his hand with Trump. I think Trump is going to have to come round to the point where Putin's making him look a fool, and therefore he's going to be backing Zelensky. Fingers crossed that's what happens. But in terms of priorities for Donald Trump, do you think it's Ukraine, or do you think it's what's going on in Gaza, or anything else?
Well, for Trump, his priorities are number one, relationship with China and pressures in Southeast Asia, because that would hit the American economies most. Secondly, it's Middle East, because anything that could then potentially interrupt the oil coming out of the Middle East and the international oil price would have a massive effect on the US economy. So what's going on in Gaza and Israel and the exportation of terrorism, remember, more US soldiers and civilians have died through terrorism that's come out from Middle East related terrorism.
And there's talk about an Iranian nuclear deal as well.
Well, exactly, and Iran getting a nuclear weapon would destabilise the world more than
Israel are not going to let Iran. Every time they get anywhere close, Israel makes sure they don't. Thank you, Israel.
Well, if Iran does get a nuclear warhead, the first we'll know about it is Tehran will disappear under mushroom cloud. I'm certain of that. And therefore, third priority is what's going on in Europe between Russia and Ukraine. That's not really affecting America in the same way the other two are.
And you can understand that. And that is why that's why the Brits and the Europeans do need to step up.
Exactly.
Absolutely. Let's talk about something completely different. Let's talk about migration, because lots of talk about immigration from the Prime Minister's speech on Monday onwards. But a new poll has suggested, this is for a poll for Merlin Strategies Power and Politics Tracker, asking respondents what their ideal level of net migration would be. This is interesting. 46% of voters said they wanted either a one-in, one-out system or for more people to leave the country every year than to arrive. Now, this is something that Nigel Farage, the Reform UK leader, is pushing. It's not, I mean, Tories are talking about getting it down, having an actual cap that's voted for by politicians, so they're held accountable to it. We've had years and years of the tens of thousands. Not going to happen. Home Office is predicting in their documents more than 500,000 more people arriving in this country than leaving this country the whole way through the rest of this electoral term. Labour saying they want to get it down, but realistically their policies, what they announced on Monday, we're looking at really only cutting 100,000 a year, and that's if they achieve it. I don't think they will even achieve that. But anyway, that's not good enough. Now, what is interesting is the attacks on Keir Starmer from the left, also people on the right, in the middle, basically going, we don't believe a word you say, mate. You've been pro-mass immigration for years. What changed? But the fact that so many voters basically have come along to the idea of no, we don't think it's an economic good. We don't think it's a cultural good. We're fed up. We want it. We want no more people coming to arrive in this country every year than are leaving the country. That is a big change in public perception, isn't it? How significant is that? It
is. I think it's very significant indeed. But that 46%, if you then turned around to them and said, well, would you go and do a cleaning job, or would you go and be a care worker, or would you go and do such and such? A lot of the jobs that the lower paid legal migrants are doing, they'll say, oh no, I'm not going to do that.
Yeah, they say that, but hold on a minute. But were those, no one was a carer and no one was a cleaner and no one picked, before we had this mass boom under the 2000s from Tony Blair, the NHS was perfectly well staffed. We had cleaners. I worked as a cleaner when I was 16. I wasn't from Albania.
Because society had got people into a position where you would go and do a job. Your motivation was, I need to go out and get some work. I don't really care what the work is. Yes, I will do
cleaning other people's toilets.
Well,
I'm going to be honest with you.
But you did it. But people don't do it now because they think they've got it.
16.
Yes, because they think they've got a choice, and therefore we need to change attitudes in society. It's getting that attitude change in society. And the other thing we need to do is stop the mix-up between legal migrants and the illegal migrants out there. And we need to deal with the illegal migrants and get rid.
That's a completely separate issue, but we also need to deal with the legal migrants who then overstay and become illegal. Plus, whether or not when some also, but again, this idea, and again, we've been told for years this complete lie. Oh, there's an economic benefit, you know, the EU or anyone from abroad. Actually, the net benefit. I mean, and again, Sadiq Khan was spouting abject nonsense the other day on the radio and on social media about the average migrant actually is a net contributor to where the average Brit is, and completely ignoring, you know, the people. Yes, oh, I'm sorry we got born on the NHS and were educated in state schools. Therefore, we cost more than the migrant who's turned up at 21. I mean, that's in terms of what is your contribution work, you know, during your work time. The average Brit is not a net contributor because guess what? The very rich pay so much tax. They're paying for an awful lot of the rest of us as well. But that doesn't mean that someone working as a hospital porter or a cleaner or sweeping the streets isn't actually doing really worthwhile job. Absolutely vital job. Yes, some jobs aren't well paid because pretty much anyone can do them because they're not involving a lot of training or academic qualifications. But that doesn't mean those aren't important, worthwhile jobs. Some would say rather more important and worthwhile than a lot of the ones that do involve that training. But this is the thing. You're in this situation where people used to do those jobs. We didn't, you know, I mean, countries like Germany until recent years, they didn't employ a huge number of foreigners running their health service. And we're told, but our health service can't function without people from abroad. This is absolute nonsense. There is a conscious decision. Governments, I mean, Cameron was the worst on this. They limit the number of people who can be trained to be doctors and nurses. And then they say, we haven't got enough doctors and nurses. We need to get them all from you know, the Philippines or from
Well, we steal them from other
India.
Countries. That's the trouble.
Yeah, no, but a lot of countries actually train far more people because there's people know that. But we could provide. We have a few thousand youngsters who are 18, have got grade A's and grade A stars in A levels in maths and science subjects, who are not able to get a job, to get a place in a medical school because those places are limited. But if you're from any other country, from India or China, Nigeria, wherever, you can come in, you can pay 3 times the fees from abroad and you can get that training. That's insane.
Completely insane. And this is where government policy coming in and looking at pinch points like doctors, nurses and all the rest of it. Instead of charging British students tuition fees and everything else, they should get that for free. That's a lot cheaper than trying to then recruit people from overseas and deal with everything else that's there. And in reality,
a lot of those people don't stay. As we discovered. I mean, again, people didn't leave because of the EU and the Brexit around 2020-21. A load of people left here in this country to go back home, as people did because of lockdown. And but this is the thing. We've now got an economy, we've got loads of businesses that are just built on having all those people coming from abroad. And people say, well, they're not paid less than Brits. No, but if you've only got a pool of Brits to pay to do that job, and then you add in, twice as many people from abroad, what a surprise. You haven't got a limited supply, so you don't have to up your wages. But this is all predicated on you've got to sort out the welfare system.
Correct.
So the 5 million thereabouts people who are of working age who could get a job of some kind, even if it was only part-time. Forget you're feeling anxious on a Thursday morning. Oh, did you feel depressed this morning? I'm so sorry. Well, you know what? So did millions of other people who went to their job and paid their taxes and paid their way. I'm fed up with it. I think most people in this country are fed up with it. When those people are not able to claim benefits, they'll get a job and they'll clean toilets just like I did, and they'll be pleased to get the pay. Simple as that.
German system, you're given a period of time on benefits. You then have to go for 3 job interviews, and if you don't take one of the jobs out of 3 job interviews, you have to take the next job you are given. If you don't take that, you lose all benefits. Well,
you say that, except, of course, virtually every single one of those 3 million migrants who came in the last, since 2015, to Germany, living in Germany, most of those are not working.
Well, exactly.
They're not working. So how are they able to not? And they're getting benefits. They're not on the streets. They're getting benefits.
Yes,
so, but we often
miracle.
talk about how other countries are doing well. They're failing to do with it as well, because we've got an awful lot of people who are in charge now who just feel uncomfortable. Like, you can't force people to work. Not forcing anyone to do anything. I'm just saying. You don't
stop paying
you
them.
don't get to live on my buck anymore. As simple as that. I would love to hear from you on this. By the way, Keir Starmer trying to deal with the stopping the boats, the illegal migration issue. He's been over in Albania today. In the last couple of moments, he has said that the UK will begin talks on sending failed asylum seekers to return hubs in third countries while they await deportation. It's not often I'm speechless. What the actual
Yeah. Well,
please beep loudly here. What the actual? So
beep,
opposed to Rwanda, which by the way, other countries now looking at Rwanda as an option, but they may be looking at Albania as a return hub in third countries. This apparently was beyond the pale and awful when he was in opposition. Now, that's official party policy. So are you kidding me?
So something that had been, a lot of taxpayers' money was put into getting it set up and all the rest of it. For purely
370 million?
For purely political reasons, he cancels it, and now he's trying to set something else up in another country that, well, clearly he can't spell because, he's now spelling Rwanda Albania. And this is we need to hold him to account for this, because this is a complete U-turn on Labour Party policy and government policy.
That says Rwanda wouldn't have acted as a way of actually deterring people to cross, because it was only going to be a few hundred people. We needs to be.
But you just increase the volume.
It needs to be everyone. It needs to be. And not after they failed after their 15th appeal for 10 years.
Yeah.
And also, again, they're going to process 110,000 of these people. They're not going to fail, guys. They're just going to be given indefinite leave to stay. Then we'll be paying for them on benefits instead. I'd love to hear your thoughts on all of this. Give us... Really? We're going to have to take a moment.